think the first question is your sample size too small? Like, what is a sample size that is way too small? And I think for a lot of people, it's surprising that it's lower than you think. So how many users is actually not enough to A/B test with? It's actually 30, less than 30. If you have 30, technically, you need a minimum of 30 observations in order to conduct significant statistics. So that's 30 people seeing each variant. You might think, oh my God, I'm out of the clear, amazing. But the problem with that is in order to use super low sample sizes, you need to be making huge changes in order to be able to detect those changes.
Looking like a baddie, I show up and make them stop. Wanna know my name so badly, cause I run this whole block. Flip my hair, move my head, show the world I'm royalty. When I walk by, they be taking bows, cause they know I'm the queen, yeah.
Hello and welcome to my Experiment Nation presentation on how to test with a small sample size. So it might be that you're a new product, a new feature, you just don't have the user base in order to A/B test. It might be that you have the user base, but you don't have the development resource or you don't have a tool that allows you to test easily. But do not worry, there are so many other ways that you can test, and depending on what you need to test, you can choose the right method. So we'll go through when you should and should not A/B test, what other ways that you can test and get answers to your questions without doing it. So without further ado, my name is Rosie. I am a product growth consultant. I've mainly worked at B2C subscription apps, What 3 Words, Peanut, Furly, on how do you monetize the product? How do you get users through the whole funnel? How do you help them when they get stuck? And that involves a lot of conversion rate optimization. And I've been in this situation a lot. So you want to test something, you look at the sample size, and you just don't have enough users. You're like, oh, we don't have enough users to test this. It's going to take us like 52 weeks in order to get to significance. It might be that you are working just with a couple of founders. It might be a really early pre-seed stage startup. It could be a new feature, a bigger startup. But essentially, you get to the point where you're like, okay, can I A/B test this? I think the first question is your sample size too small? Like, what is a sample size that is way too small? And I think for a lot of people, it's surprising that it's lower than you think. So how many users is actually not enough to A/B test with? It's actually 30, less than 30. If you have 30, technically, you need a minimum of 30 observations in order to conduct significant statistics. So that's 30 people seeing each variant. You might think, oh my God, I'm out of the clear, amazing. But the problem with that is in order to use super low sample sizes, you need to be making huge changes in order to be able to detect those changes.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
So if you have 100 people on a landing page, you need to be making big double-digit percentage changes in order to see the results. Small changes just don't cut it. So if you're trying to do something like change something by less than 5%, there's no point of doing it with such a low sample size. If you've got, 40 to 100 people seeing each variant, you need to be making changes that you think are going to have 10 to 20% changes. And if it's any less than that, you won't be able to detect the change significantly. So I think that's the first myth to debunk. Lots of people think they don't have enough users, and you might actually have enough users. It's just that you need to be making huge changes in order to be able to see those kind of A/B test results and actually make decisions based off them. So this is the second situation that I think is also very common and it causes difficulty around kind of whether you can A/B test in your business or not. So you're like, hey, I want to make these changes. I think this is the best place to work on. And there's just not either the resource or the buy-in or the tool. So it might be that you as a marketer, as a growth person, as a CRO specialist, you just might not have the resources and able to be able to run the tests that you want to run. So in that situation, that's when you need to be able to be very resourceful and use lots of different methods in order to work out what variants are going to win, what imagery, what copy, what feature specs, whatever is going to win. So we will go through alternative ways to test with low or no samples, or limited dev time or limited resources. So there's so many ways in which you might need to test alternatively. We will go through customer interviews, customer surveys, 5-second tests, prototyping, and then last but not least, no testing. So I said 4 alternative ways to test. We've got 4 there, and then there's a 5th option, which is just don't test, just launch, and we'll go through the pros and cons of each. First, customer interviews. So in my view, and I think in various people's views, if you're not talking to customers, you're not close enough to the problem and the solution. So whether or not you need to test anything, you should be talking to customers anyway. Teresa Torres suggests 2 customer calls per week. It's best practice. But if you have a question that you need to ask, something you need to work out, is A or B going to work? Should we change the copy here? Should we change the imagery? Customer interviews are a great place to either find the opportunities, like find where the problems are, but also you can use those interviews to test new solutions. So what they're great for is finding new ideas and opportunities to test. So you can say, hey, what do you normally use for this sort of thing? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What do you like about, say they use a certain product instead of your product. What do you like about their page? What was it that you liked when you first landed on it? So you can kind of understand the customer psychology and what they like, don't like, their fears and anxieties. You can also test messaging. So after some open-ended question, you can say, hey, I've got these 3 steps of messaging. I love your feedback. What comes to mind when you read that? What comes to mind when you read that? So you can kind of get some of the whys behind people liking and disliking things. You can also get quick feedback on mock-ups. So before I've, shared a slide deck and I'll be like, hey, I would love your feedback on the product. We're deciding between these 2 things, like what does this image bring to mind versus this image? If you're on this page, or kind of scroll through this page and let me know what you think. So you can either share screen, you can share them a link to something. It's not quite good for quantitative results. So the downsides of customer interviews is that you can't really quantify these things. It's quite subjective as opposed to objective, but it's really good for understanding the whys, because A/B testing can often say yes or no, this thing does or does not lead to a certain result, but you don't often know why. So this is a great way to dig into the whys, uncover the problems. You can get some quick feedback on messaging and mock-ups, but you can't get that quantitative yes, no. Even if you can A/B test, would highly recommend customer interviews. And I always use a Calendly, and you can reach out to users in different ways. So you can either put things in the product. So maybe you have a tool that pops things up. Maybe you've got, certain widgets that you can ask people questions. But you can also kind of link to a Calendly, which is what I normally do. So question in the product experience. Hey, would you be up for shaping the feature of this product? Link to Calendly. You can do it outside the product, so via CRM. This is an example from Finimize, which is an app, a finance education app. So you can say, hey, I'm the founder, or I'm one of the team. We would love your feedback. If I could just grab a quick call with you, feel free to schedule it via this link. It also sounds quite nice if it comes from the founder. And then lastly, in real life, so you can actually go to the place where your customers are. You can have your product on you, like on kind of your phone or a tablet. Be like, hey, I would love to get you a coffee for 5 minutes of your time. And so you can actually go to the place. So that's slightly difficult for some niche products, but if you're a navigation product, if you're kind of a widely used product, you can stand on the street, you can stand in cafes, things like that. And I've done that before. It's quite scary, but it's low cost, it's slightly quicker. But yeah, you really have to get out there. So you can ask in the product, outside the product, and in real life too. So that is customer interviews. Let's go on to customer surveys. So kind of a step away from customer interviews. These are a bit quicker and you can get more users. So it's a bit more quantitative, slightly more objective, but because it's kind of user research, it's still got a subjective angle to it. So they're really good for quicker, speedier results than interviews, in the sense that you can send it to a mailing list and you can get back responses in a few days. It's more quantitative. Tools like SurveyMonkey's surveying tool or Typeform will allow you to add things up. So it's like percent of users that got through a step, percent of users that answered ABC. You can assess product market fit, pricing, net promoter score, so many more things. You can ask them feedback on features, what should be in your subscription tier, is the pricing too high? Rank these features in order of your use, rank these features of, how much, like which of these features are in your subscription. And then you can get them to rank features and you can find out, 30% of people didn't realize that this feature was in the subscription. So you can get really good answers. It's just the way that you scope and curate your question set. The downsides are you can get limited detail, and if you kind of put a question that's leading or it's unclear, you'll get really low quality responses. this is an example for the Van Wessendorp pricing survey. So you can ask people willingness to pay questions. So what's so cheap you'd be suspicious about the quality? What's a good deal or a bargain? What's expensive but you'd still pay? And then what's stupidly expensive that you wouldn't pay? So you can find these online. And you can ask things like, if a competitor is 100, where do you think we should be and why? So you can kind of rank yourself against competitors. Rank these features as nice to have, must have, and don't want it. So if you're like, what features should we put on our landing page? You can send a survey and seeing which features kind of stand out to your current audience. So you ideally survey 100 to 200 people. And if you're like, I don't really understand why this has gone this way, this has gone that way, then you can kind of follow up with people and say, hey, got your responses, super helpful. Would you be up for a chat about your responses? And then you can send the Calendly link, and then you've got survey responses and you've got interviews. After that, you can kind of make things more quantitative looking. You can kind of get some percent of people do this, percent of people do that. This is the Van Wessendorp pricing model. You kind of map those prices that people respond differently to and work out your ideal price range that you can test on your landing page or in your app flow. Another example is which messaging works best. So product market fit questions, you can also find these online. How disappointed would you be if you could no longer use the product? What's the main benefit that you get from the product, and how would you improve? And so you can work out what is the way in which people describe the benefits, and then you can use that copy on your landing page. And lastly, which imagery works best? You can put these sort of things in survey. You can have pictures and people can select things, but you can compare and contrast. Which communicates this better? What comes to mind when you see this? So the surveys are so kind of flexible in the way that you do them, and there's so many ways in which you can. So how to find users for surveys, very similar to the customer research. You can do it in the product, you can do it outside the product. In real life, it's slightly difficult with surveys because people kind of need time to answer them. But here's 3 examples of sampling users. So help improve the app, that's the one we saw before. Can you answer one quick question? You can make it feel really easy. Here's Notion, help improve Notion. Look, understand your product management process. So here they offer money, and sometimes you can offer things like an Amazon voucher. I've tested it before, and actually help improve the future of the product works quite well compared to Amazon vouchers. Definitely worth testing the messaging in which you kind of ask people for their user research time. Next, 5-second test. So kind of another type of user research, but it's amazing for understanding, is your messaging clear? If you've got an assumption that I want to change this messaging, I don't think it's clear, you can test that by mapping out what you think a clearer messaging would be, or a clearer imagery. You know, maybe we think illustrations will communicate better than, you know, lifestyle imagery or product imagery. And you can map that out on a call with someone, or if you go in person to see them, you can say, what comes to mind when you see this? Or show them your mock-up, or show them the image or the copy you think is clearer. Give them 5 seconds, take it away, and then you say, what do you understand about that? What does that evoke for you? And that's an amazing way of saying, like, do people understand this in 5 seconds? Because we all know users, you know, their attention span is between 3 and 7 seconds. So 5 seconds is great for, have I written something that's clear? Have I designed something that's clear? And you can get a really good view on, if your assumption is it's not clear enough, it's not communicating better, do a 5-second test and you can work out, are you being clear in your messaging? Downsides is limited for much else. So if you've got a kind of assumption around my messaging's not clear or could be clearer, 5-second test is a great one to go for. What I normally do is on a call, I say, hey, I'm going to show you some imagery. I share screen for 5 seconds. I stop share screening. I stopped showing my screen, and like, what came to mind when you saw that? What do you understand the product to be after having seen that? So it's kind of a comprehension questions. Prototyping. So another great way to test without A/B testing. So you can mock things up. You can mock a whole landing page up. You can send someone a link to that thing. You can ask them to share screen, and then you can say, just walk through how you would naturally, and just speak your mind while you do. You can also use unmoderated testing platforms, and you can get more users quickly that way, although you do have to pay for that. So depending on your budget and, you know, how much either money you have to spend or how much time you have, there's different options available. But it's great for getting feedback on, how do people actually react to this thing when I do a mock-up of it? And your mock-up needs to be relatively realistic. Again, getting feedback on the why something does or does not work, you can send, if you're live with the person, you can ask dig-in questions. With an unmoderated testing platform, not so much. I like to do them in person. It's sometimes tricky to find the people. The downside is you have to then create the mock-up, create the prototype, but there's some really easy ways in which you can do that. So you can prototype in Figma. There's some other tools, free ones like Just in Mind, this one here, Boogle, and you can set up their really low fidelity kind of wireframes that you can then prototype. And it's as easy as like completely no code. So I can go and design page 1, page 2. I can set that the user clicks on that button, they go to page 2. And it's a real like easy thing to do. So I think people think, especially when you try in Figma for the first time, it can be quite challenging to do a prototype if you're not technical, or if you're not a designer. If you're just kind of a growth manager, CRO specialist, like you might not have the design flair, but it really doesn't matter. Some prototyping tools are very low fidelity. Some you have to pay for, some are free, obviously pros and cons of each. But I would highly recommend doing this because you can get some really good feedback on whether you're being clear, whether people know the button's there, whether people click on the button. So Figma, Just in Mind, and then there's this beautiful mock-up. Lastly, no tests, just launch to 100% of users. I feel like most people are very scared when they come up with that. I feel like there's some people who A/B test all the time and never don't, and there's some people who never A/B test, and you've got the people in the middle that have to make the decision, when do you A/B test, when do you not A/B test. It's not always the case that, say you had sample size, say you had the resources, there's still a situation in which you might not want to A/B test. So those situations might be for when you're changing small things. So if it's low risk, no business impact, no kind of, not no business impact, but no risk to the main business. If it might have like 1 to 2% changes and you're maybe a smaller business, there's one question around, should you be doing smaller changes or optimizations, or should you be focusing on the big ones? But the key thing is, if it's a small change, you might not need to A/B test, because actually the time that it takes to set the A/B test live, maintain the test, think about analyzing the test, A versus B, that's all time and maintenance that you need to take into consideration. So if it's a small test, you might not need to A/B test it, and you can just launch it. So if I'm in a small business, there's like 10 people working there, and we've got 100,000 users or less, you might say, okay, well, this is just an optimization. We're going to make that clearer based on best practice, and you can make those changes. Just make sure that you make a note of when those changes happen, because if 6 months time, what did we change on this day, and you can't remember, you need to have kind of a milestones or kind of tracking dot where you're like, these are the things we changed, they weren't A/B tests. It's also challenging to analyze if you have a lot of other things going on. So if you've got lots of marketing changes at the same time, say you're running different campaigns, you turn channels off, turn channels on, you launch new features, and you've made this change, you won't be able to see the impact of that change. If you have less going on, you can very easily make a change, and you can look at the month before, month after, see if something significant changed. So pros and cons in this, but if you've got loads of changes, loads of complexity around, and you want to be able to know what impact that has, then this is not the right situation for that. It's when you have low risk changes, potentially just small optimizations, you don't have that much going on, you can just kind of launch the change, especially if it's low risk. If there's any sort of risk to revenue, if there's any sort of risk to the core metrics, that's the situation where you would want to get a bit more confident through the other testing types we've talked about beforehand, before launching, or you run it as an A/B test. So alternative ways to test with no or low sample sizes or no dev time. So again, it could be pre-product launch, it could be new feature launch, it could be new product, it could be no tools, no devs. There's so many situations in which you might not want to A/B test. You've got customer interviews, customer surveys, 5-second tests, prototyping, and no testing. You've got the good and the bad for each. So I'll just go over quickly. Customer interviews, we talked about, they're good because they're low cost and you can find the why. They can take time and they can be subjective and you can't get certain answers. Like, would you pay for this? You shouldn't ask that in a customer interview because it's in the future. You need to be talking about what they did previously or what they do, what they react to things in front of them. Customer surveys, they're good because they're quick and they're more quantitative. They're less detail though, less follow-up. available. So if you ask a vague question, you get a vague answer. You can't exactly follow up with it. 5-second tests, they're good because they're super, super quick, but they're only really for comprehension of like copy and imagery. Prototyping, good because you can analyze the real behavior in the moment if you've created a prototype that's kind of non-biased, not too leading. They're bad because they can take longer. You need to kind of get up to scratch with the prototyping tools, but there are some really, really good prototyping tools that are free or low cost, or that you can get a free trial on. No testing, so this is obviously easy, but it's only really in cases where you've got low risk things to change, low risk, low impact, much harder to attribute. So if you do want to see the change, you need to make sure that there's no big marketing changes either side. So you can have compare time period a month, 1 month before, month after, for example. But yeah, that's kind of a judgment that you need to be able to make. So probably have a little matrix of, is this business critical? What is the percentage change that I expect? Am I going to impact some sort of major metric? How long is this going to take us to A/B test and take me to analyze if I A/B test this? Should we just launch it? And sometimes it's fine to just launch it, and you have to be able to say, yes, let's do that, instead of let's A/B test all these tiny changes. Then you've kind of got more analysis to do than kind of progress to make. So pros and cons of each of these. The best is that when you use mixed methods, so you might A/B test something, not sure about the results, and you can do some customer interviews or some prototyping. You might have a big thing that you need to change, and you can cut it up into smaller pieces and kind of test different bits at the same time. You might have a specific assumption around comprehension, in which case you can do 5-second tests and then customer interviews later. So you can really mix and match all these things, and I would use all of them. Make sure you're speaking to your customers and working out, am I using the right method for the thing that I want to change? But essentially, no sample size, no problem. No tools, no problem. No dev resource, no problem. There's so much that you can do without all that. So thank you very much. I hope that has been useful, and have a great rest of the day at Experiment Nation. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Medium, and Growth Mentor, Rosie Hoggmascall. Thank you so much, and have
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing.